Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our online event. Thank you for attending. Today, we're going to have what we hope will be an informative and engaging discussion about the future of work. And rather than simply present you with a few talking heads and boxes talking at you, we plan to involve each of you in an interactive discussion about the future of work. Since the onset of the COVID pandemic, there's been a good deal of discussion about the new normal, which is to say, what will be the enduring impacts of COVID and how will this pandemic change how we live, how we work once we're finally able to emerge from the throes of this crisis. And while many of us necessarily have been focused on the here and now over the last few months, as we've struggled to adapt to remote work, and today we're looking to broaden the lens a little bit and talk about what the future looks like. Not just through the remainder of the pandemic, but especially once we come out the other side. Which trends endure and which will fade away. So to kick things off, I'd like to introduce our panel. I'm Craig Tian. I'm the director for New York City with Freeman Clarke. Freeman Clarke provides ambitious mid-market businesses with C-level technology executives on a fractional model that's flexible, low cost, and with no risk. So we help those companies align their technology strategy with their business goals. Joining me are Rachel Druckenmiller and Rich Sexton. Rachel is the founder and CEO of Unmuted. She is on a mission to humanize the workplace by guiding leaders and their teams to be more resilient, connected, and courageous through experiential and interactive keynotes, workshops, and leadership training, both virtually and in person. Rachel activates what's best in people and organizations. Rich is the founder and CEO of Office Concierge. His almost 30 years of experience in corporate real estate include leadership positions in both traditional leasing firm as a partner at Knight Frank as president of flexible workspace specialist Office Freedom. Rich helps companies review their workspace needs, navigate the spectrum of solutions from flexible to traditional to ensure that companies align the right blend of office space with their work from home policies. So real quickly, the topics we want to cover today are, first off, the new office. What becomes of that physical space? Concerns about modification of office, what trends are we seeing? And there's a whole range of choices now. What are the pros and cons amongst those choices? Remote work and digital transformation, are these new trends, or just are we accelerating existing ones? How do you keep your mobile workforce happy, productive, and secure? Digital transformation is more crucial than ever. It's one way to be competitive in today's world, and you can't be digital on the outside unless you're digital on the inside. So transformation is about more than just work from home and customer-facing applications. Truly integrating your business systems is a real critical success factor in the modern enterprise. And finally, how to engage your workforce, how to foster greater connection and support in a more distance world, meaning, what are the trends in terms of what employees want and what they need from work? What are the key traits employees need from leaders in times of crisis? And we'll do a little bit of sharing of best practices around employee engagement. So that's our agenda today. To get us started, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to talk a little bit about employee engagement and then lead us in a connection activity.
Great. Thanks so much, Craig. One of the things I wanted to touch on when we get into this conversation is to really look at what is employee engagement. And really, it's this emotional connection to our work. And I love this quote from Simon Sinek that says, when people are financially invested, they want to return. When they're emotionally invested, they want to contribute. And so the sign of an engaged employee is somebody who is showing up ready to contribute, who wants to be a part of moving forward, who wants to be a part of making a difference and making an impact in the organization where they work. Now, as we think about what has really shifted in terms of employee engagement, one of the key things that has changed everything has been that so many people now are working remotely. And there was a state of the workplace study conducted by Buffer. They do this each year, and they have results out from 2020 from earlier this year. And interestingly, when they're asking people, what do you think of remote work and how important is that to you? And they found that, 98% of people said, I would like to work remotely at least some of the time for the rest of my career. So this is something that people actually have been wanting. And Some other research shows that people who are working remotely have the opportunity to really be more engaged because they're not subject to as many interruptions as you might be in an office. So there's certainly benefits to doing that, but and certainly some of these benefits that they're seeing are, having a flexible schedule, theoretically flexibility to work from anywhere, except when you're in the midst of COVID and might not be able to go to all the places you want, not having to commute, spending time with family, the ability to work from home and kind of set up and structure your space the way that you want to. So these are some of the primary benefits people are seeing to working remotely. But as we know, there's some struggles to this as well. So the number one and number two being collaboration, communication, and loneliness. And we had an epidemic of loneliness as a global society before COVID happened. There's a fantastic book on this topic by Vivek Murthy called Together. If you haven't already checked that out, it's a fantastic book about the importance of social connectedness as a key driver of thriving, of performance, and really of relationship building. And so these are some of the things people are struggling with: collaboration and communication. How do we do this? We're going to give you an opportunity in just a moment to experience an example of that. And then when we look at something like, loneliness, that a lot of people are working from home and they may not have that interaction with people in the office, those incidental run-ins at the water cooler or at a coffee break or at a lunch break that they might normally have. They're missing those interactions and are feeling more isolated and very likely to be struggling in that space alone and not feeling comfortable opening up and talking about that or asking for help or saying how they're really doing because they're afraid they're going to be next on the chopping block if they're having trouble. And then we all experience this. So show of hands, anyone had trouble unplugging working from home? Because it's like you're working your home there. Sometimes they're in the same room. I mean, I know a lot of people, it's like their office is the place where they sleep as well. And so that can be really challenging. I was doing a half day conference yesterday with a group of HR professionals, and someone shared that the CEO was operating out of the, actually this might've been Craig that said this. I forget who was sharing this, but operating out of the bathroom of their home. And they had a background up, like one of the Zoom background screens. And their team said, "Hey, take that screen away. Let us see the human here." And so it just made them that much more relatable to say, "Hey, look, the only room I can find any peace in my house is the bathroom. So this is where I'm operating out of." So we're getting to see people as human in a way that we never have before. But there's also things like distractions and trying to stay motivated. And of course, dealing with technology as a challenge for that. So those are some of the challenges, but we all know that in the midst of what's happened in the past 6 or 7 months, that there have been some silver linings. There have been some bright spots. So we're going to invite you into an experience of digital connection. So we're going to ask that you take a moment to reflect on this question, to think about in the past 6 months, reflect on what you have seen or done in the workplace that's been particularly creative or resourceful or innovative. Something that you've done at your organization, something that you've heard about somebody else doing, something that you've read about in an article or seen in a video that you thought was particularly interesting or intriguing because of how creative or innovative or resourceful it was. And then think about, if COVID were to end tomorrow, which of those ideas or practices would you want to carry forward? So we're going to give you a moment to just reflect on that, to think about, jot some notes down, and we're going to set up a couple of breakout rooms, and we're going to have you in groups of about 3 people. So you're going to be in groups, some of you will probably be in groups of 4. But we're going to have you in groups of 3 or 4, and you'll have the opportunity in that conversation to give each person take about a minute or so, minute and a half to share. This is what I'm seeing that I think is particularly creative, innovative, or resourceful. And so when we have equal voices, that creates psychological safety, which is, according to Google, the #1 contributor to high-performing teams. So when you're in a breakout room, when you're structuring these conversations, you want to make sure that it's very clear on the outset that you're structuring the conversation so that it's understood and expected that everyone has essentially pretty equal talking time. And then as you're hearing other people share these ideas, we ask that you have one person in your group who's your note taker. So one person in the group who is the note taker, who's going to be jotting down just, in a Word doc, Google Doc, wherever, jotting down all the ideas that are shared by your group. And then we're going to ask when you come back to the main room that you paste those in the chat. So that way we can see everyone's ideas, and then we'll open up the floor to hear from a few of you, to hear if there's some ideas that you think are particularly energizing that you'd want the whole group to share. We're going to create an opportunity for you to do that. So you're going to be in your rooms together for a total of about 8 minutes. So this is going to be a relatively quick exercise, but we ask that you, again, take the time to have give everyone about a minute and a half or so to share. And then when we come back again into the main room, then we'll have the opportunity to hear from some folks, and we'd ask that you paste all the ideas that you come up with into the chat. So that is our ask. I'm setting up the breakout rooms now. If you want to take a moment to just jot down whatever ideas are coming to mind, feel free to do that. And then you will momentarily see a blue box pop up on your screen. And that is the room that you are meant to be in today. And then we ask that you just have an engaging conversation with the people in your group. So welcome back. We hope that you had a great conversation. Raise your hand if you got to meet somebody you didn't already know. So show of hands, you got to meet someone you didn't already know. Fantastic. How's that for virtual networking, right? Not quite the same as being in person and shaking hands and all that kind of stuff. But if you'll let us know in the chat, whoever was a note taker for your group, if you want to start pasting in the chat, what were some of the things that came up in the conversation with your group? And then we'd love to hear from a couple of folks. And just hear if there's something that stood out in particular from what your group shared. So we have some things popping up in the chat. Freedom Fridays. I have a feeling I'm not the only one that has a question about that. So feel free, if you want to raise your digital hand, what you can do is you can go to the participants on the bottom of the bottom bar, the little icon says participants, click on that. You'll see a list of everyone's names on the side. And then there's a little blue hand next to all the little buttons. And if you want to raise your digital hand, I'd love to hear from 2 or 3 folks about what came up in your group's conversation. We would love to hear from a couple of folks. So if, yeah, love to, let's see here, any digital hands raised? I'm seeing, if we can unshare that. Richard, we have your screen being shared.
I wish I knew how to do that.
Stop participant screen sharing, there we go.
I know, I feel a lot better about my desktop now.
Kirthi, okay, wonderful. So everyone's gonna mute so that we can hear from Kirthi. So there you go.
Thanks, Rachel. I just wanted to say that Freedom Friday was Tom's idea, so I will let him talk about that. But I think one good thing for our group due to this lockdown has been, as a team, we were geographically dispersed and we would meet like once in 2 months or 3 months. But now every day, the first thing we do in the morning is have a video call and just like a brief 10 to 15 minutes. How's everyone doing? That's been great for the teamwork and the culture piece. So a good takeaway post-COVID as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's fantastic. Yeah, the people that sort of felt like they were alone on an island virtually, it's like, well, no, now everyone can be together at any time, regardless of where they are geographically too. So wonderful. I know you're tagging Tom in that. Tom, did you want to take the tag and share what the Freedom Fridays was? Don't put you on the spot,
Sure. So first off, good morning, Rich. But
Hi, Tom.
yes, so Freedom Fridays was kind of an idea that was rolled down from our upper management. I work in a manufacturing environment, so 7 days a week, it really never stops. When you're working across the world, your email from Asia and Mexico and Europe, it really never stops. So one of the ideas was no one was really taking vacation time because there was nowhere to go. So they opened up the option to be a little more flexible with work time. So if you could compress your work schedule into Monday through Thursday and leave Friday mornings as a little bit of a flexible time and take time off Friday, that's where the Freedom Friday kind of came from. So it was a nice summer activity, right? You got to get outside and spend a little more time with everybody.
Yeah, wonderful. Love that idea. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being tagged, letting yourself be tagged. Anyone else want to share? There's so much. I mean, there's a ton of great stuff in the chat, and we'll make sure that we share this with you afterwards. All these ideas. Let's see. Family UX. Simon says family user experience events for employees and their families. You were always remote. That might be something that people would benefit from hearing from if you're willing to share.
Yeah. Hi, Rachel. This is Simon Davis. I'm willing to speak, but it's 6:30 a.m. in Arizona, so I'm not willing to go on camera.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I mean, it was interesting. So when this whole thing started, our team got together and determined, there's about 90 of us collectively determined how we could sort of best get through this, and came up with this concept of family user experience. And we had events that were geared not just to employees, but how do we engage people's families and kind of help out. So like the reading time, for example, was 30 minutes when those with younger kids could try and corral them around a laptop and get a bit of a break from, from the normal activities. And then we did scavenger hunts for older kids. And then we also did happy hours and other events for the actual employees. And what I really found is that, frankly, if we hadn't have done this, I wouldn't have had the connectivity I now do with the rest of our larger team, because we're all off on our own, doing our own thing, focusing on our own area. I didn't know most of the faces, even though I've been at the company for a year and a half. And I think that's really, really helped us as a team gel. And I think work a lot more effectively together. And 6 months later, we're still doing the employee focused things. We found we didn't actually have that many people with younger children, so that sort of tailed off after about 7 weeks. But I think it's been a great experience from that side for sure.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. We'd love to hear from. There's fantastic ideas in the chat. Let's see, daily coffee half hours on Teams. Friday 5 is from Keith. Friday 5 p.m. beer o'clock as a team, and monthly team days in a socially distanced office. Office-based staff have struggled not having the field team in the office like they used to. So that may be something that we address when we talk about kind of the future of space and whatnot. Anyone else want to share? Anyone see something in the chat that you're really curious about that you want to tag somebody in? Anything else that you want to share that came up in your conversation that was energizing?
Could I share?
Sure.
Okay. I think one of the things that we had to deal with was to keep trust going. We had a pretty close group anyhow. And it's easy when you see each other in person. You get a chance to talk or say hello or whatever. And unless you can keep trust among everyone at a high level, then people don't talk, and it lowers innovation. And I think and I'm in a consulting business, I think similar to yours, Rachel, but even with our clients, we had to do that as well. And we worked very, very hard. And I guess we worked from the premise of the old culture can't be redesigned to work in a new culture. That we're here, however long we're going to be here. And my background is pharmaceuticals, and I happen to think we're going to be here for a long time. That's my own bias, but we're here. And I think you have to change the culture that you're working with. It's like a mergers and an acquisition, right? Mergers and acquisition, you got to create a whole new culture to make it go forward. Whether you're working with a client or in engineering or in manufacturing, or whether you're working with your own team, you had to create a new culture. And the new culture had to be based on beginning to trust each other again and getting clients to trust what you're doing. So we always give room to make meetings move a little bit slower, let people talk about things a little bit more than they would normally. The information people would exchange prior to a meeting, we let everybody exchange within the meeting. We find that really helps. So that's what I could add to that. So.
Well, thanks for sharing that, and I appreciate the conversation, and this will segue us into, I'll chat about a few things that we can do kind of collectively and as leaders, and then I'll hand it over to Craig and Rich for their conversation. But Gallup actually did some research about 10 years ago, and they found that there were 4 things that followers need from leaders in times of crisis. And the very first thing is trust. They need trust, compassion, stability, and hope. So trust, compassion, stability, and hope. Notice all of the answers is not in that list. So oftentimes we think as leaders that, oh, well, people are looking to me to have all the answers. I've got to get it right immediately. But no, what people really want is a human. They want a human, and trust is built over time. Trust is the result of the stacking of small moments over time. So when we ask someone for feedback and then we act on it, that builds trust. When we reach out to someone to say, the very simple question I would encourage each person to jot down, how can I best support you right now? It might seem like a really simple question, but not enough people are asking it of their people. How can I best support you right now? When you ask a question like that as a leader, and then you respond, and then you deliver and act on that, that builds trust. When you reach out to someone to appreciate and recognize the effort that they've put forth, that helps to build trust as well. Showing up consistently, that builds trust. Being a person of your word, that builds trust. being honest about the information that you have. If you say, hey, the latest update is that we don't have an update, that builds trust, because people realize, all right, they're not going to just make up a story to tell me something, to placate me. They're actually going to tell me the truth about where they are. All of those things help us to build trust.
What we do is base our work on neuroscience as well, so that we make people be aware of what triggers reactions in their brain, what type of hormones trigger the reaction, so they can be on top of what's going on. I won't go through that, but that's the basis of what we do. And once people are aware of their thought processes and how they process thoughts, they can grab a hold of that, and it helps them stop that distrust and everything else that can arise. But I agree with everything you've said. I mean, you're right on. So
thanks so much. And I'm going to just so we can keep moving. That's an excellent point, because the brain science is so much of this. I'm just going to keep us moving here, just so I can make sure that I give Craig and Rich their ample time. But yes, absolutely. People understanding how their brains are working right now, recognizing that we're in a state of fear and anxiety and overwhelm, that we cannot access the creative and innovative parts of our brain. So when we open the conversation by having each of you go into smaller groups to have those conversations, what that does is that creates an environment where everyone knows that in that small group, even if not in the main room, in the small group, they're going to have equal voice. And when people know they're going to have equal voice, when they know that they're going to be seen and they're going to be heard, there's less anxiety around making sure, am I going to get my shot? Because at least you had at least two other people hear you. And so that's really important as we move forward in this environment, that we're making sure we're creating the opportunity for people to feel seen and heard. And so compassion, stability, and hope are some of the other things that as leaders we want to be demonstrating right now. And compassion, again, can really look like recognizing that everyone right now is carrying around an invisible backpack. Everybody is carrying around something personally, professionally, that you may or may not know about that is affecting how they are showing up. And so it's more important than ever that we demonstrate empathy. We've often heard more recently that the future of CEO is not chief executive officer, but chief empathy officer. That the leaders of the future who are most effective are going to be leaders who demonstrate care and demonstrate that type of compassion for their people, that genuine compassion. So I'll leave you with a couple of questions to bring back to your organizations, to ask people, and then I'm gonna hand it off to Craig and Rich for their part of the conversation here. But what I wanted to bring up, these are a couple questions from one of my favorite books on the topic of employee engagement. This is called The Truth About Employee Engagement by Patrick Lencioni, who wrote a bunch of other books, including The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And so here's some questions to consider. Do I feel like my manager cares about me and understands me as a person? This is something that people need to answer yes to. This is around anonymity. When people are disengaged, it's because they feel anonymous. They don't feel seen, or that their manager cares about them. The second component is, do I know what's expected of me and how it's measured? This is more important than ever, because people are unclear about boundaries and expectations right now. But when people have a clear sense of measurement of their own work, that's something that increases engagement. And the third thing here is around what's called relevance. So when people can answer the question, who am I helping and why does it matter? When they can answer that question, they feel relevant. When we feel relevant, we feel engaged. So these are 3 things, and we'll share these with you following the session as well, but those are 3 things to be thinking about and considering when you're thinking about engagement, employee engagement at your organization, that these are things we want to make sure are in place. So with that, I know that's a bit, and we certainly could have a 2-hour conversation around this. So today we're going very high level, but with that, I want to turn it over to Rich, and I'm going to stop my share there. Turn it over to Rich and Craig to talk about the physical space and remote work and how we're seeing that play out in the future.
Great, thank you very much, Rachel, and welcome everybody. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces. I see that we've got people from all over the world actually joining us. So we will be focusing more on the New York market today, and speaking in quite general terms. So if anyone has any specific questions related to their real estate issues, then feel free to contact me separately afterwards. I've been in the industry for 30 years, and this is by far the most extraordinary time. I mean, I've been through several recessions, but nothing has impacted the commercial real estate markets like the work from home phenomenon created by the pandemic. So I'm not hearing any conversations now about the death of the office. I think after 6 months of this, everyone has had the chance to experience the best and best and worst of work from home. And I think that's really come out in those discussions we've just had. And I think a lot of us are looking forward to getting back to the office at least a couple of days a week. Every conversation I'm having with clients is that they see a need for a physical office, but it will be smaller because they will blend work from home policies requiring less desks. And this is coupled, of course, at a time of a recession when people are looking to cut costs. So taking on board what everyone has talked about, though, the role of the office is also changing. And the emphasis on it will be about the social hub, an anchor for people to get together, to congregate, and the focus will be on collaboration and innovation with task-based work taking place at home. And I think that really marries in to what we've just been talking about in terms of building trust and building culture. So that's really important. So where I actually see the biggest impact going forward is on how we procure and consume office space. And I think there will be a much greater demand for flexibility and a pressure on traditional leasing. So what I mean by that is, traditionally when we've been acquiring real estate, we've been treating it as a commodity. You pay a landlord a rent per square foot and sign a lease, and typically in New York, that is for over 5 years, typically 7 to 10 years. The longer the lease, the more the landlord will give in a way of incentives, like a contribution to fit out, rent-free period, but you're investing in a medium to long-term solution. However, in recent years, what we've been seeing is the growth of the flexible office market, where you can sign short-term agreements on a month-to-month basis, little to no capital expenditure, and everything from furniture to cleaning is bundled into one monthly fee. And this is on a per desk basis as opposed to the square foot basis. So it's actually more akin to the hospitality industry. And just like 1 to 5 star hotels, you have a range of operators in terms of quality and price. And this is commonly referred to as procuring on a space as a service. So that's what we've seen in the shift from traditional to flex. It's the way that we procure away from the longer lease to the more space as a service model. And now, Craig, we've obviously adapted into our industry the SaaS acronym, but how is as a service model driving your business?
In much the same way. I mean, in our case, SaaS is software as a service, and so we're already seeing that same dynamic play out in IT, and we were seeing that even before COVID, as we'd seen a steady move toward software as a service, and that's only become more pronounced now during the pandemic. But it's more than just software. I mean, IT in general is moving toward subscription and consumption-based models, where whether it be software, cloud platforms, networking, support, and even increasingly hardware, both infrastructure and end user devices, are moving to the same model. And as a result, we're moving away from the traditional CAP-centric approach to more of an CapEx-centric approach to more of an OpEx-centric approach. And if you think about servers, for example, in the olden days of a few years ago, and frankly in 2020, last month, feels like a few years ago, but if you needed to provision a server, you'd purchase the hardware, you'd assemble it, rack it, configure it, put the OS, networks, applications, and so on. Aside from the upfront cost of that, the process would take weeks or even months. And in the end, you're paying for a server that you might only be partially utilized on a steady state and perhaps completely idle in off hours. So on top of that, if you've got uneven capacity requirements, say holiday season for an e-commerce site, you need to deploy all these additional servers that you might sit idle for 10 months out of the year. So when you compare that to cloud, where you can provision a server within minutes and pay based on utilization, right, instead of paying for an idle server, you can see the rather obvious benefits. And you can add capacity as you need it and tear it down when you don't. But as I noted, it's not simply about software and infrastructure. We're moving to a broader concept of IT as a service, where everything is either consumption-based pricing or a flat per user monthly fee. And just with office space, it's all about agility and flexibility. So with that in mind, kicking it back to you, Rich, how is that same flexible and agile approach to the physical office going to evolve?
Well, I think what it's going to do is give businesses and employees a much broader choice of how and where they work. Traditional leasing will still work for some companies, and subleases particularly are flooding the market and will be a great cost-effective solution in some cases. So I'm not ruling out traditional leasing. That's obviously a very good solution for a lot of my clients. But with the rethinking of the role of the office, I do see a good quality, well amenitized space becoming much more in demand. And in fairness, this is a pre-COVID trend which is just accelerating. We're going to see more providers of flexible space. For example, traditional landlords like Tishman and Speyer, they have already started creating and managing their own flexible product called Studio. And other landlords are looking to get in on the act through partnering with operators like Convene and Industrious, and they are bringing them in to have them manage the flex solutions in their buildings. Another exciting trend we're seeing accelerate really plays into this flexibility and agility is the book office space on demand, just as we've been talking, by the hour and even half hour. The industry is anticipating what we're calling a demand for third spaces, so between the office and the home. And you're going to see more and more of the acronyms WNH and WFA, which are work near home and work from anywhere. So the idea is that you have a distributed workforce, you give them more options. So this is known as the hub and spoke or the city as a campus model. And in just the last month, WeWork, Breather, and Industrious have all come out with on-demand apps and passport style packages. And there are also apps like DeskPass or Upflex, which aggregates available desks across multiple operators that you can book on their platform. So, you know, a real change in the way that we're going to procure space. And some of you may have seen that in Japan, Starbucks have collaborated with a company called ThinkLab. And they've created these little booths in their coffee stores where they can go and sit and do focused work. So I'm not sure what their situation is about bringing this to the States. But if you think about how many people have the Starbucks app downloaded on their phones, and you think of how much bricks and mortar they have, it could create an incredible network of these new focused spaces just to drop in on. And of course, though, having such a distributed network of employees throws up other challenges. And Craig, I'll pass this back to you. How is IT and digital transformation keeping up with all of this?
Well, you know, I think they go hand in hand. You know, we often tell our clients and our prospects that all businesses are digital businesses. And while we were saying that long before the pandemic, it's only more starkly apparent now that that's the case. And I think there are two sides to this coin. On the one hand, you simply must be able to interact with your customers online, whether that's through online commerce sites or customer service portals, mobile applications. This is no longer a leading edge sort of proposition. It's really an imperative. But we shouldn't limit the discussion just to customer-facing transactions. You can't, as I said at the outset, discussing the agenda, you can't be truly digital on the outside if you're not digital on the inside. So we need to transform our internal systems and line of business applications as well. And that means more than just moving to Office 365 or using Zoom for meetings. It's about your financial systems, CRM, your marketing tools, business intelligence. We need to not only move these tools into the digital realm, but ensure that they're seamlessly connected, that your sales system links directly to your order entry system, that we're eliminating or at least automating the kinds of manual processes and handoffs that can introduce inefficiencies and errors. Too many businesses aren't able to take advantage of business intelligence locked in these siloed systems because they're unable to get the necessary telemetry, you know, out of them in real time. And so if you're going to have a workforce that's working from home on a regular basis, then this kind of digital transformation is really essential. It allows your employees to access information they need to make timely and effective decisions, even when they simply can't just walk down the hall and ask a colleague, what's the status of this order, or how's the sales pipeline looking today? So, you know, in light of that, you know, speaking of the folks working from home, there's been a lot of talk about the fact that the city is dead. So, Rich, is New York City dead? And if so, are you seeing more activity in office space and people leasing office space in the suburbs?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. And a question actually just popped up from Sarah as well in the chat about working outdoors. And I think that's obviously a big driver for people to get out of the city. And I think what you're seeing is a demand in office space in New York City with, you know, over a trend over the last few years of the creation of terraces and rooftops. And I think everyone is repositioning their current offices to try and make as much ventilation as possible. So, yeah, the suburbs have really attracted a lot of attention with, there's talk of the exodus of the people leaving the city. From an office procurement situation, all the data for the third quarter is now out. We haven't seen any evidence to suggest a pickup in office leasing in areas like New Jersey, Connecticut, or Westchester County. It may be just that it's too soon, that people are all too committed to existing leases, so they haven't made that move yet. One thing is clear from the data is that everything is very much on pause, and we're heading for one of the lowest leasing years on record in New York City. So, but I also think that the people that live in the suburbs tend to work from a much nicer home office. So when we talk about third spaces, I'm not necessarily sure that, that is something that they're going to need. I see third spaces happening more across the city for young workforce who are in more cramped accommodation or sharing. I was just touring yesterday with a company who want to keep their Manhattan-based hub, but have a lot of young staff in Brooklyn. So we're looking at downsizing their Manhattan office and providing on-demand access to offices in Brooklyn. And I think it's one of those unintended consequences of work from home that is actually quite inequitable and favors the older, more established workforce over the newer and younger workforce. And I know that Craig, and Rachel covered a lot of this as well, just studying the effects of work from home. What are you seeing in terms of the best practice in IT as it relates to the remote workforce?
Well, it's a good question. I think we're just beginning to learn what the best practices are for sustained long-term remote work at scale. Certainly, we've all had to learn best practices about doing meetings online, things like, elevating your screen so it's at eye level, getting the lighting right. I forgot to pull down my shades, so I got a big bright light in my background. Maybe, using a ring light or halo light, figuring out how to manage the mute button, making sure you got a decent background. Finding a location that reduces the chance that you're going to be interrupted by your children or your dog. But beyond that, we're starting to get some real scientific insight into what works well and what doesn't. And I've got a couple of slides, that speak to that a little bit. Microsoft recently has, introduced this new concept of the together mode. And basically, and that slide sort of shows you what it looks like, but basically they replaced the sort of Brady Bunch grid of faces with things like auditorium seating or a coffee shop kind of setting. And honestly, I thought it was a little bit hokey when I first saw it. But it actually, there's actual science behind it as the next couple of slides illustrate. So, and I got to pull my slide back up so I can see what you're looking at. But, there's indication that, there's real fatigue that happens from staring at that grid of squares. The next slide basically shows your brain on Zoom. What they found is that by, introducing this together mode and sort of changing up the relationship between you and the folks that you're talking to online, it can really have a dramatic impact on that Zoom fatigue. And so the question kind of becomes, why is that? There's a professor from Stanford, Jeremy Ballinson, who had actually consulted on the together mode with Microsoft. And he says that the faces presented in your typical, video conferencing grid reflect the dimensions of standing and talking to a person face to face that's 2 feet away from you. And he says that very rarely, quoting him, are you standing 2 feet away from a person and staring at them for an hour like that, unless you're getting into conflict or about to mate. And he says that when you have faces staring at you like this, there's an actual arousal response that kicks in, the fight or flight mode. If you're in fight or flight mode all day, it's going to be absolutely exhausting. It's just taxing to do meetings that way. You probably also noticed that Teams and Zoom and others have added a feature like a button to raise your hand, which we used in the meeting today, to allow employees who may be uncomfortable barging into a conversation to have their voices heard, achieving that equal voice that Rachel referenced earlier. We're still very much in the early innings around this, and there's still a lot I think, for us to learn about how we maximize employee engagement and satisfaction, during remote work. Rachel, we're sort of squarely back in your wheelhouse here. And so I'd, kick it back to you and ask, what are the other best practices that you'd recommend around remote work and employee engagement?
Yeah, so one of the things that I would recommend is doing something like we did earlier today. So I've done, facilitated 85 virtual workshops, presentations since the middle of March. And one of the things that I find to be particularly powerful is that a lot of times organizations are looking for something outside of themselves. What do the experts tell us we should do? What are everybody else's best practices? And they get caught up in looking at what an organization is doing that might actually not be anything like the culture of their organization, the structure of their organization, the personalities of their leadership team. And so what I'm a really big fan of is bringing design thinking practices into virtual experiences. And I did this, yesterday. There's so much technology we can use, whether it's something like, Mural or Google Jamboard or Padlet or Miro. There are so many tools out there that you can use for virtual collaboration. And what I found, for instance, working in a school, I was working with a school system, a private school that had about 220 faculty and staff. And they said, we're really struggling to figure out community and connectedness right now. And so we facilitated a series of workshops and asked a very simple question to people. We said, hey, how might we come together in creative and innovative ways to support each other as faculty and staff in the next 3 months? Because 3 months feels tangible. Like a year from now might as well be 5 years from now for most of us. Anybody else feel that way out of curiosity? Like a year from now, like what is that? We have so much uncertainty. But 3 months feels digestible. And so as a result of that, we ended up coming up with, over 100 ideas. They left feeling really energized and they did the work. So one of the things Margaret Wheatley says is that people support what they create. And so if you want people to be engaged in the outcome, they have to be part of the process. And I think if you take away nothing else from this conversation, and there's so much to take away, but that would be one of the things that I would invite you to really reflect on. How much are we involving our people in where we are going? How much are we involving a cross-section of our people in helping to shape and co-create the vision for what the future of work looks like here? So that's one thing that I would add into that, and really making sure you're upskilling your leaders. There's so much focus on technical capacity and competence. Those are important, but if you have a highly technically competent leader who has no emotional intelligence and demonstrates zero warmth or care or compassion, it's going to be really, really hard for people to trust that person. So we need more than ever to see really the human side of each other, and to invite conversations, as was mentioned, in the front end of our meetings, for instance, to ask people, hey, how are you doing? How are you doing really? Having one-on-one conversations, really creating the space and opening the door for people that might otherwise be afraid to bring that up themselves.
Rachel, there's a couple of questions in the chat. Could I?
Yeah, go for it.
Some of those. I think, firstly, I had a closer read of Sarah's question, and I think I didn't cover it all or read it all before, as it was in the middle of when we were chatting. But I do think that, digital nomads, again, an acceleration maybe that people will work overseas in places like Bermuda. I think, what we're talking again in very general terms, it's not a one size fit all scenario by any means. And I do see that, some companies will go 100% work from home, no doubt. They won't bother with an office. They will see the benefit of cutting costs. And whether they do that forever, I don't know. And I think we've already spoken a lot today about how that may not be the best solution for everybody. Another question that's come up, and again, is quite a common one during a recessionary period, is how do I get out of my lease? Well, a lease is a contract, so you're bound by contract law, and you need to review the lease with your broker and your attorney and see how the clauses allow you to mitigate your overheads. There are alienation clauses which should allow for subleases and assignment. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of people have put their spaces on the market for subleasing. It allows you to try and get a new tenant in and get rental cash flow in straight away. And you need to speak with your landlord. If you're having problems, that conversation needs to be ongoing. You're going to have different responses from different landlords, but open communication is key, and good quality advice from your lawyer and your broker. And hopefully, if you've got that going into your lease as well, you will have the required flexibility to handle these situations.
Great. All right. Were there any other questions you wanted to touch on, Rich, that were in the chat?
Nothing specifically to real estate. I thank everybody for being so engaged, and I think that's partly down to you, Rachel. Thank you so much for being a wonderful host. And yeah, no, it's great. Maybe we can go through these later and contact people if we see anything particularly that we think we can follow up with. And feel free to contact any of us with any questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got a quick thing I'd like to share, if that's okay.
Certainly.
It's a really good idea that I was experimenting with some colleagues who were feeling remote. They felt they didn't like it, they didn't have access to their colleagues. So what we did was we decided for 2 hours just to keep our Zoom monitors on. So it felt like you had a buddy in the room and you're both working, but then if you suddenly want to ask a question, if you're working on the same thing, you can have a conversation and it's like you're in the office together. Yeah. It's a really great idea, and you can, agree boundaries and say it's just for an hour, or whatever, not for the whole day, obviously. But that might be a tip that people can use if they want to try and get people to engage. And I've used it, and it's been quite successful.
Yeah, I love that, Penny. I think that's fantastic, of creating that sort of like asynchronous, interaction that we really miss. I mean, we're so much. I mean, people say so often, right? Those water cooler conversations that as we're passing each other to go to the restroom, in the elevator. I mean, there are so many things that happen in those interactions. And so figuring out strategies for how to replicate those, or not even replicate, but create a new version of them. I think that's part of what will really serve us, is instead of saying, I wish it was like this, I wish it was the way it was before, I wish it was not helpful. Like, we can grieve and mourn what was, and that's important to do, and look forward and say, well, what's possible now that was never possible before? And to give ourselves. So thank you for sharing that idea. That's fantastic, Penny. Wonderful. Well, with that, I know we are a minute from our time. So just wanted to see if anyone has any lingering questions, any thoughts. We would love to know what is really resonating with you. If you want to let us know in the chat, what was maybe a comment, a thought, or idea that you're taking away from our time together today, perhaps an insight. We would love to know that in the chat. So feel free to share that with us. And then so we will pull that up. All right, let's see. I'm going to pull up really quick. There's something called Mentimeter, which is another neat tool that I like to use. And so if you wanted to either just click on Mentimeter and answer that question, or just drop in the chat, feel free to do that. Otherwise, Heidi, if you want to drop the survey link into the chat, that would be super helpful. So we can have the survey. We have a quick survey. We would love your feedback. It's really helpful for us to know this is the first time the three of us are collaborating on something. And so we would appreciate your insights on what resonated, what remaining questions you have. Would you like to participate in something like this in the future? What'd you think of the breakout experience? All of that kind of stuff. We would love to know your thoughts and your input. So I'll just hand it over to see if Craig and Richard, any final words. I know, again, I'll share here our contact information. So if you would like to stay connected with us, we're all on LinkedIn, and you can connect with us here through email, and we'll send a follow-up email as well. With that, there's no other, let's see if there's any.
No, I just want to say thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to following up with people outside of this session.